The Maracanazo, 1950. Brazil was already a nation of football. Not just a country that played it. A nation built around it. Football was identity. Football was pride. Football was the one thing that made an entire people feel invincible. And in 1950, Brazil hosted the World Cup with one belief held by every single person in the country. This trophy was coming home. The Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro had been built specifically for this tournament. 200,000 people packed inside it for the final match. The streets outside were already celebrating. Samba music filled the city. Newspapers had already printed the headline, "Brazil, World Champions." The trophy engravers had already inscribed Brazil's name onto the cup. Players had already been promised gold watches and lifetime pensions. The Mayor of Rio stood before the crowd and declared, "You Brazilians, whom I consider victors of the tournament." Brazil just needed a draw. 1 point. Against Uruguay. Brazil scored first. The world exhaled. And then Uruguay equalized. And then in the 79th minute, Alcides Guja picked up the ball on the right wing. He had done it before in the match. The goalkeeper moved to cover the cross. Guja did not cross. He shot. The ball went in. 200,000 people went completely silent. Not noise. Not anger. Silence. The kind of silence that only exists when something so devastating happens that the human mind cannot process it fast enough to react. Players wept on the pitch. Fans sat in their seats for hours, unable to move. The goalkeeper Loisir Barbosa blamed himself for the rest of his life. He bought the goalposts from the Maracanã after the tournament and burned them in his backyard, trying to destroy the memory. It did not work. Years later, a woman recognized him in a supermarket and pointed at him in front of her young son. She said, "That man there is the one responsible for the greatest tragedy in Brazilian football." Barbosa died in 2000. He said shortly before his death, "The maximum sentence in Brazil is 30 years. I have been paying for 50. Only 3 people have ever silenced the Maracanã: Frank Sinatra, Pope John Paul II, and Alcides Guja." The Battle of Santiago, 1962. Before the match even started, the war had already begun. 2 Italian journalists had traveled to Chile before the 1962 World Cup and written articles describing the country as plagued by poverty, illiteracy, and moral decay. The articles were read across Chile. The public was furious. The players were furious. And when Italy arrived to play Chile in the group stage, the football pitch was never going to be just a football pitch. Chile was a proud nation. Football was how they showed the world who they were. And now Italy had insulted everything they stood for. Before kickoff, the atmosphere inside the stadium was not anticipation. It was hatred. Within 12 seconds of the opening whistle, the first foul had been committed. Within 8 minutes, an Italian player had been sent off for breaking a Chilean player's nose. What followed for the remaining 82 minutes was not football. It was organized violence played out in front of cameras broadcasting to the entire world. Boots went into legs with no intention of winning the ball. Elbows connected with faces openly. A Chilean player delivered a punch so clean it would have been impressive in a boxing ring. Players kicked each other while the ball was on the other side of the pitch. The referee, English official Ken Aston, had no control from the moment the first foul was committed. He later said the match was uncontrollable and that he was not refereeing a football match. He was acting as a target. The stadium whistled constantly. Algerian fans held up banknotes mocking both teams. Some supporters turned their backs entirely and refused to watch. When it was over, Chile had won 2-0. 2 Italian players had been sent off. Multiple players have been physically escorted from the pitch by police. And the BBC presenter who introduced the broadcast that evening told his viewers without any exaggeration, "The game you are about to see is the most disgraceful exhibition of football ever televised." It was not sport. It was 2 countries at war with a football as a weapon. Andrés Escobar, 1994. Colombia in 1994 was supposed to be a story of triumph. Pelé himself had named them as one of his favorites to win the entire tournament. They had flair, creativity, and a squad that played football with a joy that made neutrals fall in love with them. Their captain Carlos Valderrama ran the midfield like a conductor. Their fans arrived in America believing that history was about to be made. It lasted 9 days. In their second group game against the United States, Colombia's defender Andrés Escobar moved to cut out a cross. It was a routine defensive action, the kind he had made thousands of times before. But the ball deflected off his boot and rolled past his own goalkeeper into the net. Colombia lost 2-1. They were eliminated from the tournament before it had really begun. Escobar was 27 years old. He was calm in defeat. He spoke to the press with dignity. He flew home to Medellin alongside his teammates, knowing the country would be disappointed, but believing that life would move forward. 10 days after the own goal, Escobar was leaving a nightclub in the early hours of the morning. A group of men confronted him in the car park. Words were exchanged. Witnesses reported hearing the men shout, "Thanks for the own goal," as they fired 12 bullets into him. Andres Escobar died on the ground of that car park in Medellin. A bodyguard connected to a local drug cartel figure was convicted of the murder. Reports confirmed that enormous sums of money had been lost by cartel members who had bet heavily on Colombia to progress. A football match had cost a man his life. Before he was killed, Escobar had written a column in a Colombian newspaper. It was published just days before his murder. He asked the country not to let the disappointment destroy them. He wrote about unity, about resilience, about the future. He ended it with the words, "Life does not end here." For him, it did. The disgrace of Gijón, 1982. Some of the darkest moments in football are not born from violence or tragedy. Some are born from pure cold calculation. From two sets of professional footballers deciding that the result of a match mattered more than the sport itself. That is exactly what happened in Gijón, Spain, on the 25th of June 1982. West Germany and Austria were the last two teams to play in their first-round group. Algeria had already finished their matches. Algeria had done everything asked of them. They had beaten West Germany in one of the greatest upsets in World Cup history. They had played attacking football. They had earned their points. Now they sat and waited to see if they would progress to the next round. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If West Germany won by exactly 1 or 2 goals, both Germany and Austria would qualify. Algeria would go home. If Germany won by 3 or more, Austria would be eliminated instead. If Austria won or the game was drawn, Germany would be out. West Germany scored after 10 minutes, and then the game stopped. Not officially. The referee never blew his whistle. The players never left the pitch. But for 80 minutes, both teams passed the ball slowly between themselves with no attempt to score and no attempt to defend. The match was over the moment that first goal went in. Both teams knew it. Everyone watching knew it. Algerian supporters in the ground waved banknotes at the players in open contempt. Spanish fans whistled without stopping for the entire 80 minutes. West German and Austrian supporters stood in silence, some with their heads bowed, ashamed of what they were watching. One group of German fans unfurled a white flag and waved it at their own players. When the final whistle went, the score was West Germany 1, Austria 0. Both nations progressed. Algeria went home despite having more points than Austria going into that final match day. FIFA investigated. FIFA found no rule had been broken. No rule existed against two teams choosing not to play football in a football match. The only lasting change was that from the next World Cup onwards, all final group stage matches were played simultaneously, so that no two teams could ever coordinate a result between them again. The disgrace of Gijón, as it became known permanently, proved something uncomfortable about football. That given enough incentive, the sport can be abandoned entirely by the very people paid to play it, and no one will be punished. The hand of God. 1986. This was never just a football match. 4 years before Argentina and England met in the quarterfinal of the 1986 World Cup in Mexico City, the two countries had fought a real war. The Falklands conflict had lasted 10 weeks and killed over 900 people. British and Argentine soldiers had died on the same islands both countries claimed as their own. The war had ended in 1982. The hatred had not ended by 1986. When these two nations were drawn together in the knockout round, the weight of everything that had happened between them filled the Azteca Stadium before a single player had touched the ball. This was not a game. This was history continuing by different means. In the 51st minute, Diego Maradona rose to challenge England goalkeeper Peter Shilton for a high ball. The ball went into the net. Maradona ran to his teammates celebrating. The English players surrounded the referee screaming. The linesman had not flagged. The goal stood. Replays confirmed what every English player already knew. Maradona had punched the ball into the net with his left hand. There was no ambiguity. The images were clear. The fist was visible. And yet the goal stood because in 1986 a referee's decision was final and the technology to prove it beyond argument, did not exist in real time. After the match, a journalist asked Maradona about the goal. He did not deny it. He smiled the smile of a man who had just gotten away with something historic. He said the goal was scored a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. For minutes after that goal, Maradona picked up the ball in his own half and proceeded to dribble past 5 England players before sliding it past the goalkeeper. It is still considered by many to be the greatest individual goal ever scored. 2 goals. Same match. Same man. For minutes apart. One was the purest form of cheating. One was the purest form of genius. Argentina won 2-1 and went on to lift the World Cup. England went home. And football was left with a question it still has not fully answered. What do you do with a moment that is both the worst and the best thing the sport has ever seen? The 1978 World Cup. Argentina. On the surface, the 1978 World Cup was a celebration. Argentina hosted it. Argentina won it. The captain Daniel Passarella lifted the trophy in front of a home crowd delirious with joy. Ticker tape rained down from the stands. The whole country celebrated through the night. Underneath the surface, the tournament had been played in a country controlled by a military dictatorship that had seized power 2 years earlier. The junta, led by General Jorge Rafael Videla, had come to power through a coup in 1976. In the 2 years between the coup and the World Cup, thousands of Argentine citizens have been arrested, tortured, and murdered by the regime. Many were thrown from military aircraft over the sea. They became known as the disappeared. The junta understood what the World Cup meant. They understood that football could make a country forget, or at least look away. The tournament was used deliberately as a tool of propaganda. Videla was photographed in the dressing room with the players after Argentina's victory. His face was everywhere. The image projected to the watching world was of a stable, proud, celebratory nation. While the final was being played, a detention and torture center known as the ESMA was operating less than 5 miles from the stadium. Prisoners held there later testified that they could hear the roar of the crowd from inside the building. They could hear Argentina scoring. They could hear their country celebrating. And they were being tortured within earshot of it. The football itself was not clean either. In Argentina's final group game, they needed to beat Peru by 4 goals to reach the final ahead of Brazil on goal difference. They won 6-0. Peru's goalkeeper was Argentine-born. Peru's government had recently received a shipment of grain from Argentina worth $50 million. No definitive proof of match fixing was ever established. The suspicion never went away. The 1978 World Cup produced a champion. It also produced one of the most disturbing questions in the history of sport. Can a trophy be celebrated when the hands that held it were soaked in the same darkness that surrounded it? Zidane, 2006. Zinedine Zidane was the greatest footballer of his generation, perhaps the greatest of any generation. He had already announced that the 2006 World Cup final against Italy would be the last match of his career. The entire sporting world knew it. This was his farewell, his last performance on the greatest stage the sport has. He scored in the 7th minute, a penalty, chipped down the middle with impossible arrogance and precision. The perfect beginning to the perfect ending. The match went extra time level at 1 goal each. 110 minutes of football had been played. Zidane was still the best player on the pitch. France were minutes away from potentially winning the World Cup in the final game of his career. The story was writing itself into something beautiful. And then in the 110th minute, Zidane stopped running. He turned around. He walked deliberately toward Italian defender Marco Materazzi, and he headbutted him in the chest. The stadium fell into confused silence. Players from both teams stood still, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The referee had not seen it. The linesman had not seen it. But the 4th official had been alerted, had reviewed the footage, and raised his flag. Zinedine Zidane, in the final minutes of the final match of the greatest career in French football history, was shown a red card and walked off the pitch past the World Cup trophy without being able to touch it. France lost the penalty shootout. Italy won the World Cup. Materazzi later confirmed he had said something deeply personal and offensive about Zidane's sister. Zidane never apologized for the headbutt. He said he could not regret it, because to regret, it would mean Materazzi's words were acceptable. The world debated who was right for years. None of it changed what happened. The greatest player of his era walked past the trophy he had spent his entire career trying to win, took off his shirt, handed it to a FIFA official, and disappeared down the tunnel into retirement. The last image of Zinedine Zidane as a footballer was a red card. The Minirazzo. 2014. Brazil had waited 64 years to erase the memory of 1950. 64 years since the Maracanazo had broken the country's heart. And in 2014, hosting the World Cup again on home soil, with the greatest Brazilian squad in a generation, the wound finally felt like it was close to healing. They had reached the semi-final. Germany stood between them and the final. The match would be played at the Estadio Mineiro in Belo Horizonte. The crowd believed. The players believed. The country believed. Germany scored in the 11th minute. They scored again in the 23rd minute. Again in the 24th. Again in the 26th. For goals in 6 minutes. The Brazilian players stood on the pitch looking like people who had forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. The crowd went silent. Then some of them began to cry. Cameras cut to fans in the stands with tears running down their faces, flags lowered, unable to comprehend what was unfolding in front of them. Germany scored a 5th before halftime, then a 6th, then a 7th. Brazil 0, Germany 7. At full-time, Brazil had been defeated by their heaviest margin in World Cup history. At home, in front of their own people, having been the hosts who were supposed to finally deliver the trophy their country had craved since 1970. Players sat on the pitch, at full-time weeping openly. David Luiz pulled his shirt over his face. Others stared at the ground, unable to move. The Brazilian word for it appeared immediately. Minirazzo, named after the stadium, named the same way they had named 1950. Because Brazil understood better than any country alive that some defeats leave marks that never fully heal. 64 years of waiting, and the wound had not closed. It had reopened, and this time the whole world had watched it happen on live television in the country that invented the beautiful game. There are no words for it. There is only the scoreboard. Brazil 0, Germany 7. And that would be it for this video. Every one of these moments changed football. Some changed the people inside it permanently. Some changed the rules. Some changed nothing at all except the lives of the people who lived through them. Let me know in the comments which moment you think was the darkest. And make sure you subscribe, because there is a part 2 coming.